I talk about a lot of really good RPGs on this channel. Not only because I like the genre a whole lot, but I'm also just not really a big fan of being super negative. I definitely criticize aspects of games, and I have no problem tearing them a new asshole if they're bad, but with how a lot of channels are dominated by constant negativity on this site, not trying to call out any channel in particular here, negativity is definitely a big factor of clicks on this site, and pretty much everywhere else on social media. But for me, I just genuinely try to be more positive than negative. However, there comes times where when I play a JRPG that doesn't really invoke any sort of positive or really negative reaction out of me. Some of these games where I'm just kind of like, okay, I guess, by the time it's over. Last week we talked about Final Fantasy Type 0. That was kind of one of the games that was similar to that, but at the same time there were at least some positives I could walk away from. But the game we're talking about this week, however, is a game that I just genuinely felt nothing from start to finish, and that is the spin-off title, Final Fantasy DIRGE of Cerberus. It's a pretty infamous game for Final Fantasy fans, as it's one of the weirder black sheep titles that was made to kind of just expand upon the popularity of Final Fantasy VII. But most of the people who ended up playing it weren't really all that impressed by it, and barely anyone nowadays even talks about it or sings its praises. Square hasn't even fucking ported it, despite how hard they're pushing the 7 remake right now. So, admittedly, it got me a little curious. Why did this game get left behind by both developers and fans? I mean, after playing it, I immediately understood why, and that's why this video exists, since I'm also still in my Final Fantasy phase. Let's talk about this game too. That's enough of a yap fest for the opening though. I'm Crimson Rosso, the future king of the RPG Nation, and welcome to my review of Final Fantasy Dirge of Cerberus, the most okay RPG. Yeah, so from that opening alone, it may not seem like I don't really have anything all that positive to say about Dirge of Cerberus, but I do actually have some praises for this PS2 exclusive. First and foremost, this game looks fucking incredible for the time. Square was a company that was in their fucking bag in the PS2 era when it came to visuals. Sure, not every game from there was a visual masterpiece, even they suffered from the same kind of restrictions every other company was facing at the time, but in terms of visual style, they were easily one of the best on the system. Whether it be through pure stylization or by making the characters look as realistic as possible for the hardware, they knew what they were doing. And Cerberus really does have some of the best visuals on the system. Makes sense since Final Fantasy VII's biggest selling point was its visuals back in the day, so it makes sense that Cerberus should be as visually impressive as well. And while I do admittedly have a bit of an issue with this game due to its lack of any real color, the visuals do capture that gritty 2000's edgelord energy that a lot of games were chasing back in the day. And I will say that seeing characters like Vincent or Cait-Sith in the PS2 engine was kind of a treat. Also, side note, be prepared for this to be the genuine only super positive part of this game, because everything else is kind of mediocre. And since I brought up other parts of this game, how about we wrap up talking about the visuals and get to talking about the gameplay. So, what exactly is the gameplay of Dirge of Cerberus like? Well, the best I could probably describe it is... You ever play Resident Evil 4? Yeah, this game is trying to emulate that because it's a third-person shooter in the form of an RPG. The entire gameplay loop is you going through a level, you kill all the dudes in your way, and through either beating the level or dying, the experience accumulates and you get a level up. And, you know, to give this game credit, it's not really horrible to play. It's not really all that amazing, but it doesn't feel like absolute dog shit. And there are some positives as they give you a pretty decent number of weapons. There's a lot of unlockable stuff and the game isn't super long either, so it never overstays its welcome. Heck, there's even some things here I genuinely like the customization to your guns, or being able to give them different elements or spells to wipe out the foes in front of you. There's even a moment in the game where you play as Cait-Sith, and it's like a little Metal Gear Solid style reference. They even give Vincent a little hand-to-hand combo attack if enemies get too close. This emo-ass grandpa's got some hands, I'll tell you that. Now, all these things are nice, but they don't make the game good. In fact, I'd argue it's a pretty forgettable loop overall, but for what it's worth, I do think you will be able to finish this game without getting too annoyed by the gameplay. Plus, that final level is pretty rad, I won't deny that. And that's kind of the same with the story, too. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but I do have some praises for it, especially in regards to the fact that it actually develops Vincent more. Someone who always felt like needed more time in the spotlight, considering that in the original Final Fantasy VII, he's just an optional party member, so you could completely skip getting him if you wanted. Here, though, they actually go into his past a lot more. And while it isn't the most engaging thing in the world, it is genuinely nice to see. I do think if you are a fan of Final Fantasy VII and the world that that game has built, there's a pretty good chance you may actually like this game's story. A lot more than I did, at least. Yeah, since I'm not really much of a Final Fantasy VII fan, I just thought the game was fine. I do genuinely appreciate that this game is giving Vincent more depth, as that was one of my complaints with the original, but I wouldn't really say the story ever really impressed me. Just pretty passable for the most part. One thing I will say is unbelievably good, though, is that's the music. Composed by Masashi Hamazu. I don't know if I got that name right. I'm so sorry if I didn't. Someone who actually has prior experience working on Final Fantasy with 10, and boy oh boy, you can definitely tell. It's got the same feel most Final Fantasy games do with an orchestral soundtrack, but like with Final Fantasy X, he adds in a few electronic soundtracks as well, which in turn gives this game its own unique musical feel. Like, one particular song I want to point out is towards the end where you enter this ultimate limit form and you're just flying through the area and just killing everything with your super weapon, and this badass metal song is playing in the back. I genuinely wish I could find the name of the song because it's so fucking awesome sounding. And if you can find the name of the song, please let me know. I am begging you. I so want to know what it is. And that's really all I have to say in terms of pros. Tried my best, but admittedly there wasn't a whole lot to praise here. So now it's time we just moved on to the cons. So with my bits of praise sung for this game, let's get into my issues. No complaints about how it looks, it's all very visually appealing, so let's just jump straight into the gameplay complaints instead. First and foremost of the bigger complaints, this game is way too easy. So you remember earlier how I said there was some cool customization and even a few extra guns you can get to up your gaming experience? Yeah, about that. Get ready for you to basically forget those exist, since you can just make it through pretty much every single area with just your pistol. I think it's cool that they added these extra weapons, but you never really need to use them unless you're super low on the pistol that just instantly kills everyone in like 1 or 2 hits outside of the bosses. Hell, combine this together with the limit break form you unlock, and this game turns into a total cakewalk, even on the hardest difficulty. And while I really do want to be surprised that this game is way too easy, it kind of isn't. I've played a lot of Final Fantasy games at this point, and one thing I've really come to notice about them is that a lot of these games aren't that hard. They've got maybe 1 or 2 bosses, but for the most part, these games are pretty easy to breeze through. I guess that's the result of them being like the mainline mainstream RPG, like they're for everybody so they can't be like super brutal. But I was kind of hoping, maybe deep down, that with this game trying a completely new gameplay style, maybe it would be a little more challenging. No, it isn't. And look, I'm really not one of those guys who says that difficulty really needs to be in a game for it to be good. But at the same time, I really wish there was a bit more challenge to these games, just so I can get more of a feeling of accomplishment from beating them. I'm rambling at this point. Let's get to the other issue. The other super notable flaw about this game is that it just has zero identity to its gameplay. Like I mentioned before, that the loop itself is pretty serviceable, but overall kind of forgettable. And that's really because it feels less like it's trying to be its own game and more like just putting stuff together from different games that were really popular. Why was this game a third-person shooter? Because Resident Evil 4 was popular, of course. Why did we have a Metal Gear Solid Stealth section? Because Metal Gear was the biggest fucking thing at this point. Don't ask why it only lasts 3 to 5 minutes. Why was this game so dark and gritty despite the fact the title came before it was bright and colorful mixed with its grittiness? Because that was the style of the time, of course. And every stage has got to make sure it lines up with a Linkin Park song. And I want to point out here that I'm not against the idea of games taking from other games. If developers want to take ideas from popular games and IPs, that's completely fine with me, as long as they do something creative with it. Hell, one of the games that I reviewed on this channel, Octopath Traveler, basically just took its boost mechanic from Bravely Default's. But even then, Octopath still does enough with its boost mechanic to feel different from the Braves. And even if you take that boost system out of the equation, Octopath Traveler can still stand on its own 2 feet because its combat system and character writing is just that good. Dirge, however, just does not get those praises. It just takes these ideas and doesn't really do anything unique with them other than putting them in an RPG. That's why I just say the game is serviceable but not good or great. It is a game that just simply exists. It has a few good ideas, but it doesn't save it from being incredibly mediocre. And that's really all I have to say about the gameplay, so what about the story? Well, to its credit, it doesn't really do anything horrible. In fact, it even improves upon one of my bigger criticisms of 7, and that's that Vincent doesn't really get anything in terms of narrative. So it is nice to see. However, if you're not like me and don't really give a shit about anyone after the events of 7, then you're just not going to plain old care about this narrative. And you can't really play it if you were a fan of guys like Cloud, Tifa, or Barrett, solely for the fact of they don't really appear in the story until the end of the game. The only ones that really matter are Vincent, Kate Sith, and to an extent Yuffie, who shows up at the later half. And even then that's debatable because she really doesn't do all that much in the narrative. it's mainly a game for people who care more about Seven and Vincent. And if you don't care about that kind of stuff, you're just plain old not really going to care about this narrative. The villains are pretty neat, they've got great designs, and it's cool to see them be used again in the remake DLC. But I really struggle to say they're worth talking about outside of their designs. Outside of that, though, the story really doesn't have that much else to bring up, and since I don't have anything else to bring up, we're just going to move over to my final thoughts. Like Final Fantasy Type 0, Dirge of Cerberus is in such a weird fucking spot for me. Like, there's not really anything here that I would call genuinely good outside of the music and visuals, but at the same time, I don't really think this game does enough for me to genuinely call the whole experience bad. As a result, the game just kind of sits in this weird to almost underwhelming kind of area. It just kind of exists. Honestly, I don't even know if I'd really recommend it outside of just needing something to kill time for about a couple of days until your next big release. But to me, it's just not something I'm going to revisit, and that's why I really have no problem giving it a pretty meh 4.5 out of 10. And with that, we've reached the end of the video. Definitely a much shorter one than I've usually done in terms of my recent reviews, but I really just don't have a lot to say for this. Don't worry though, if you want a longer video, my next review should have a lot more for me to say. And if you want to stick around to see that, do me a favor and like and sub down below. Leave a comment to help me out in the algorithm, or if you're just up for a chat about the game. And if you want to hang out with my awesome community or support the channel financially, the links to my Twitch and Patreon are in the description. Have a lovely day, folks, and I'll see you next time for more RPG content.